His phone beeped with a message. Helen, just wanted to say thank you again for everything. I couldn't have done any of this without you. See you tomorrow. Ben stared at the message, his thumb hovering over the screen. What could he say? That he would follow her anywhere if only she asked. That every smile she had given Andy felt like a knife in his chest. That he had loved her silently and completely for years. In the end, he typed the only answer that his role allowed. It's been my honor. Everything is ready for tomorrow. Get some rest. He put the phone down, picked up the whiskey, and finally took a long, burning swallow. Tomorrow he would watch the woman he loved marry another man. And he would smile, and he would clap, and no one would ever know what it cost him. The wedding day dawned bright and clear, as if Lagos itself was celebrating the union of two of its most successful children. The Grand Imperial Hotel had been transformed into a flower-filled wonderland, with white roses and lilies covering every surface. No expense had been spared. This was, after all, the society wedding of the year. In her luxurious suite, Helen sat before a mirror as the makeup artist put the finishing touches on her face. Her white dress hung nearby, a masterpiece of lace and pearls that had been flown in from Paris just 3 days ago. "You look beautiful," said Lola, who as chief bridesmaid was already dressed in a flowing blue gown. "Absolutely stunning." Helen smiled, but her eyes held a hint of something that looked almost like worry. "Thank you. Is everything going according to plan downstairs?" "Of course," Lola assured her. "Ben has everything under control, as always. That man runs a wedding as well as he runs your office." At the mention of Ben's name, a small shadow passed over Helen's face, but before Lola could notice it, there was a knock at the door. Helen's mother entered, already dabbing at tears with a lace handkerchief. "My baby," she whispered, coming to stand behind Helen. "Look at you. Your father would have been so proud." Helen reached up to squeeze her mother's hand. From renting a tiny apartment in Mushin to seeing her daughter marry in the Grand Imperial, Mrs. Adesina's life had changed as much as Helen's had. "The guests are arriving," her mother continued. "So many important people. Even the governor is here." "Ben made sure everyone got their invitations," Helen said. "He knows how important today is." Meanwhile, in a smaller room down the hall, Ben was indeed making sure everything ran perfectly. Dressed in a sharp black suit, he moved through the hotel with quiet authority, checking in with the caterers, confirming with the band, ensuring the photographer knew exactly which moments Helen wanted captured. No one would have guessed that beneath his calm exterior, his heart was breaking. No one would have known that each task he completed brought him closer to the moment he dreaded most. A hotel staff member approached him with a concerned look. "Sir, there's a woman at the back entrance. She says she needs to speak to you urgently about the groom." Ben frowned. "Did she give her name?" "Yes, sir. She said her name is Sarah Phillips." The name meant nothing to Ben, but the last name made him pause. "Phillips? Same as Andy? A relative, perhaps?" "Show her to the small conference room on the first floor," Ben instructed. "I'll be there in 5 minutes." After checking that everything else was running smoothly, Ben made his way to the conference room. Inside, he found a well-dressed woman in her early 30s, nervously pacing. She looked up when he entered, relief washing over her face. "You must be Ben Solomon," she said. "Andy's mentioned you, Helen's assistant." "Yes," Ben confirmed, his professional mask in place. "How can I help you, Miss Phillips? The ceremony begins in just over an hour." Sarah's face darkened. "That's why I'm here. The ceremony can't happen. Helen needs to know the truth about Andy." Ben's heartbeat quickened, but he kept his expression neutral. "What truth?" "That he's already married," Sarah said bluntly. "To me." The world seemed to stop for a moment. Ben stared at her, looking for any sign of dishonesty or delusion. He found none. "That's a serious claim," he said carefully. "Do you have proof?" Sarah opened her handbag and pulled out a brown envelope. "Our marriage certificate, photos, bank statements showing his transfers to me. Everything you need to prove that Andy Phillips is a con man who targets wealthy women." Ben took the envelope with steady hands, though inside he was reeling. "May I ask why you're bringing this to me and not directly to Helen?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Because I tried to reach her at her office, but they wouldn't let me see her." I found out about the wedding from the society pages. Andy told me he was in Dubai on business. He's been telling me that for 3 months now." She wiped her eyes. "Look, I don't know Helen, but no woman deserves this. I've been married to Andy for 2 years, and in that time, he's dated 3 wealthy women. He takes their money and disappears." Ben opened the envelope and quickly looked through its contents. The marriage certificate looked real. The photos showed Andy and Sarah looking happy together, clearly a couple. The bank statements showed large transfers, money moving from accounts with women's names to accounts in Andy's name, then to offshore locations. "Have you gone to the police?" Ben asked. "Yes, but they say it's a civil matter because I willingly gave him access to my accounts," Sarah explained. "He's careful to keep everything just this side of legal. By the time they build a case, he'll be gone with Helen's money." Ben's mind raced. If what Sarah was saying was true, and the evidence suggested it was, then Helen was about to make the biggest mistake of her life, not just personally, but professionally. He could only imagine what Andy might do with access to Rising Star Properties accounts. "I need to verify this information," Ben said, his assistant mode kicking in. "Please wait here." He stepped out of the room and immediately called a contact he had at the Lagos State Marriage Registry. After a tense 5 minutes, his contact confirmed that a marriage between Andy Phillips and Sarah Okonkwo, her maiden name, was indeed registered 2 years ago. No divorce had been filed. Ben's next call was to a private investigator the company sometimes used for background checks on potential business partners. The PI promised to run an immediate check on Andy Phillips and call back within 30 minutes. Back in the conference room, Sarah looked at him hopefully. "Will you tell her?" "Yes," Ben said firmly, "but I need a bit more time. The PI I just called will help confirm the broader pattern. I don't want to go to Helen with just one piece of the story." Sarah nodded. "I understand, but please hurry. I don't want her to go through what I did." Ben left her with a promise to return soon and headed back to check on the wedding preparations. Everything was proceeding smoothly. Guests were filling the hotel's grand ballroom. Andy had arrived with his groomsmen and was chatting easily with some of Lagos's most influential businessmen. From a distance, he looked every inch the successful oil magnate about to marry the woman of his dreams. Ben's phone rang. "The PI, Mr. Solomon, you need to hear this," the investigator said without preamble. "Your Andy Phillips is actually Andrew Peterside. He's changed his name at least twice that I can find. He has no connection to any legitimate oil company. Instead, he has a pattern of marrying or dating wealthy women, gaining access to their finances, and disappearing. There are complaints filed against him in Ghana, South Africa, and the UAE. "Send me everything you have," Ben instructed, "right now." Within minutes, his phone pinged with a file containing everything the PI had found. Ben quickly scanned through it, his heart pounding. It was all true. Andy Phillips was a fraud, a con man who had targeted Helen for her wealth and success. Ben looked at his watch, 40 minutes until the ceremony. He had to act now. He went back to Sarah, who was still waiting anxiously. "I have the confirmation I needed. I'm going to speak to Helen right away." "Thank you," Sarah said, relief evident in her voice. "I know this isn't easy." As Ben turned to leave, Sarah called after him. "You really care about her, don't you?" "Not just as her assistant." Ben paused. "She deserves better than lies," he said simply, and left. He made his way to Helen's suite, his mind whirling with how to break this news gently. There was no good way to tell someone that the person they were about to marry was a fraud. No good way to shatter dreams on what should have been the happiest day of her life. But before he could reach Helen's room, he ran into Lola in the hallway. "Ben, there you are. Helen's been asking where you went. The ceremony starts in 30 minutes. Ben pulled Lola aside. "I need to speak to Helen, alone. It's urgent." Something in his tone must have convinced her, because Lola's teasing smile faded. "What's happened?" "I can't explain now, but it's important that I see her before the ceremony begins." Lola studied his face for a moment, then nodded. "She's almost ready. I'll tell her you need to speak with her." "Thank you," Ben said, grateful for Lola's trust. A few minutes later, he was outside Helen's door. When he knocked, Lola opened it, gave him a meaningful look, and slipped out, leaving him alone with the bride. Hellen stood by the window, already dressed in her wedding gown. She turned when he entered, and Ben's breath caught in his throat. She was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Radiant, perfect. And he was about to break her heart. "Ben," she said with a smile, "Lola said it was urgent. Is there a problem with the arrangements?" Ben took a deep breath. "Hellen, I need to show you something. And I'm so sorry, but it can't wait." Her smile faltered at his serious tone. "What is it?" He held out the brown envelope. "This was brought to me today by a woman named Sarah Phillips. She claims to be Andy's wife." Hellen stared at him, her face frozen in shock. "That's not possible. It must be a mistake." "I verified the information," Ben said gently. "I called the marriage registry. I had I run a check. It's all here, Hellen, along with evidence that he's done this before. Andy Phillips isn't even his real name." Hellen didn't move to take the envelope. She shook her head slightly, as if trying to clear it. No, this can't be happening." "I'm so sorry," Ben said, his heart breaking for her. "But I couldn't let you go through with the wedding without knowing the truth." Slowly, as if moving underwater, Hellen reached for the envelope and opened it. She pulled out the contents and began to look through them. With each document she saw, her face grew paler. 2 years, she whispered. "He's been married for 2 years. All this time." Ben wanted nothing more than to take her in his arms, to shield her from this pain, but he stood still, giving her the space to process the devastating news. "Where is she?" Hellen asked suddenly, looking up from the papers with fire in her eyes. "This Sarah. I want to meet her." "She's downstairs in the small conference room," Ben replied, surprised by Hellen's reaction. He had expected tears, not this cold anger. "Take me to her," Hellen demanded, "now." "Hellen, the guests are all here. The ceremony is supposed to start soon. Perhaps we should—" "Now, Ben," she cut him off, her voice hard as steel. "I need to hear it from her directly." Ben nodded. "Of course, let me get you a coat or something to cover your dress. We don't want to cause a scene in the hallways." He found a long coat in the closet and helped Hellen put it on over her wedding dress. Then, carefully checking that the hallway was clear, he led her to a service elevator that would take them to the first floor without passing through the main lobby where guests were gathered. Sarah looked up in surprise when the door opened and Hellen walked in, Ben following behind her. "You're the bride," Sarah said, standing up quickly. "I'm so sorry about all this." Hellen's face was a mask of control, but Ben could see the slight trembling of her hands. "Tell me everything," she said to Sarah, "from the beginning." For the next 15 minutes, Sarah told her story. How she had met Andy 2 years ago when he claimed to be a shipping executive. How they had married quickly, and how he had gradually gained access to her savings. Modest compared to Hellen's wealth, but still substantial. How he had disappeared for longer and longer periods, always with excuses about business trips, until she had grown suspicious and hired a private investigator of her own. "That's when I found out about the others," Sarah concluded. "At least 2 other women before me. Both wealthy, both left with far less after Andy was done with them." Hellen listened without interrupting, her face becoming more composed with each passing minute. When Sarah finished, Hellen turned to Ben. "What time is it?" she asked calmly. Ben checked his watch. 10 minutes until the ceremony was scheduled to begin. Hellen nodded, as if making a decision. "Here's what's going to happen. Ben, I want you to go to the ballroom and tell everyone there will be a slight delay. Say I'm having a problem with my dress or something. Then find Andy and tell him I need to see him in the blue reception room. Alone. Tell him I have pre-wedding jitters and need reassurance." Ben hesitated. "Hellen, are you sure?" "I'm sure," she said firmly. "Sarah, I'd like you to wait here. Ben will come back for you when it's time." "Time for what?" Sarah asked, confused. A small, dangerous smile appeared on Hellen's face. Time for Andy Phillips to face both of his women at once. Ben had never seen this side of Hellen before. The cool calculation in her eyes reminded him of how she approached difficult business negotiations. Only now, it wasn't a business deal at stake. It was her heart, her reputation, her future.